Hi, Matt Sainting here for yet another episode of the DAV podcast. Now, as veterans, we understand that if we're put into harm's way, that the United States government would do anything in its power to bring us home, years or even decades later. And our guest today is the director of the organization that does just that. Retired Air Force Major General Kelly McKeague is the director of the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency. This is the arm of the Pentagon whose mission it is to recover unaccounted for Department of Defense personnel, either listed as missing in action or prisoners of war. And they operate in many countries around the world, to Vietnam, to the Solomon Islands, sometimes North Korea, all around Europe, looking to recover those who are still waiting to return home. We go into all kinds of different stuff, from the science that's involved to the men and women who pick up this mission as their torch, and even talk about a little bit about how the families of the missing can get involved. So I'm going to stop right there, jump right into it. Here's Kelly McKeague of the DPAA. Kelly, thanks for being with me today.
Matt, good to see you. And more importantly, thanks for the opportunity to be on DAV's podcast.
Absolutely. And you are certainly no stranger to DAV. You were at the last convention at Atlantic City, and there's been a DPAA representative going back as long as I've been with DAV. So we thank you there.
It is, because your committee that is very well led is one that's very active. We're working with the DAV staff here in Washington, as well as the committee. We always love being at DAV events, whether it's in the field or here in Washington.
Well, we're happy to have you here. Can you briefly describe what is the mission of the DPAA?
We as military, as a nation, sent men and women off in harm's way. They answered the call to duty. When they did not come home, it's that fulfillment of that warrior ethos, never leave a fallen comrade behind. And so we are the embodiment of that fulfillment, of that sacred obligation, that moral promise of searching for, finding, hopefully identifying, recovering remains, and then identifying them for the purpose of repatriating them to their families.
And this is the arm of the Pentagon that has this mission.
It is.
Government program.
It is.
What does it mean to provide the fullest accounting possible?
So there are no POWs. Intelligence shows us that there are no POWs currently held from any of the conflicts. However, there are significant numbers of missing in action, MIAs. And so we kept the POW MIA moniker simply because that's a legacy that dates back to the, long time. And it's one that the nation recognizes.
Absolutely.
So there are currently 82,000
wow.
Americans still missing from World War II through Operation Iraqi Freedom. So the fullest possible counting is, again, doing the research, hopefully finding an area that we can then send a field investigation team, finding remains, and then bringing them back to one of two laboratories for the purpose of accounting for them so that they're no longer missing, and more importantly, return to their families with full military honors burial.
Absolutely. And I feel like every week I see a different press release about remains that were found all over the world, going to Pearl Harbor, Vietnam, Korea, other places. And what does it say about a nation that goes through these steps to bring folks home, sometimes 6 decades later or longer?
First of all, it's emblematic of our values as Americans, that again, we recognize that these men and women did what President Lincoln called the last full measure of devotion. And so responding and making the supreme sacrifice on behalf of their nation, what it means is that there's an organization that fulfills that promise made to them and their families, but it also sends a signal to veterans, like you, that these are your comrades in arms. And it also is a marker for those in uniform today that they know, should they go missing, if America is doing this for missing from 80 years ago, what are they going to do for me today?
And the number you said, 82,000, is a jarring number. I think most people, when they hear this, it kind of shakes them to the core.
It shook me to the core. I've been associated with, this was my last job in the Air Force, and I've been a civilian in it for 7 years. I was shocked to learn there was that many. Now, at the same time, we estimate 38,000 to be recoverable.
Okay.
Deep water at sea losses, we're limited right now to about 200 feet. Anything beyond that today is what we call non-recoverable. But even at 38,000 recoverable, that's still a daunting number.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This work is, of course, done in other countries, as we mentioned. How does the DPA go about finding and locating these individuals? I mean, do you have to partner with a host nation?
Always. So obviously, we work in 46 different countries all over the world. we are emboldened and beholden to the host nation simply because we need access. And oftentimes they're affording not only access, but assistance. We have a team in Kuwait today that is there working hand in glove with the Kuwaiti Navy. And the Kuwaiti Navy has been very generous in providing platforms, divers, equipment, fuel, making the success of this Operation Desert Storm mission a success.
Absolutely, absolutely. Is there a priority theater right now? I know we have ongoing missions in Vietnam and in South Korea, and I know there are some scientific or tropical causes that might make it so the Vietnam, we're trying to get after those folks now. Is that right?
It is. So we have teams all over the world that work World War II, Korean War, and Vietnam War losses. The Vietnam War is our operational priority. It's the war we know the most about. 1,576 still unaccounted for from the Vietnam War. So number one, we know the most about it. Number two is it's also the one that we are backed up against time. First-hand witnesses are aging, they're dying. And so that oftentimes leads us to be able to be taken to a spot where an individual, whether it's a US veteran or a Vietnamese veteran, can point to. And then thirdly, the soil acidity in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia is a pH of 11. So oftentimes it's degrading, if not destroying remains and leaving us only with teeth.
It breaks down super fast in relation to what we see on the Korean Peninsula.
Absolutely. Or in the South Pacific. Juxtapose 80-year-old remains in the South Pacific. Our teams are finding fully preserved skeletons on Tarawa, in Solomon Islands, fully preserved simply because of the environmental conditions.
Wow. Interesting. Talk to me a little bit about the men and women doing this actual work, the teams that are going and recovering, bringing information and remains back and identifying. What motivates them to come to work? And tell me a little bit about what they do.
It's the most eclectic organization I've ever been associated with. You have historians, researchers, intel analysts on one side, and then you have world-renowned scientists on the other. And it's a linear process that if the researchers and historians aren't taking an area this size and narrowing it down, we won't be able to send a team. And they in turn, hopefully will narrow it down to even something smaller. That's when we send the excavation team. It's made up of 725 individuals, 55% civilians, and military service members that come from all four branches. We have divers, we have mountaineers, EOT technicians, linguists, medics, basically everything that you can imagine that you need for a 15-person team to be deployed in a remote, austere area and basically function over 45 to 60 days.
And of course, this is, again, a Pentagon team, but for half of these folks who are civilians, they're not military, they might not have the structure, but they have these values and they believe in the mission, and that kind of is able to let them go towards this way of life and this job?
Absolutely. You know, whether, again, they're PhD historians or PhD anthropologists, they are literally seized by the mission. It becomes purposeful for them. They see what their contributions are leading to, and more importantly, they want to serve. It's an interesting command and control dynamic.
Yeah.
So it's led by a captain or a senior NCO. They do all the logistics. They do the pre-planning. They do the host nation contacts, et cetera. But once they get onto the site, the captain or the senior NCO turns it over to the civilian, because then the anthropologist or archaeologist is directing the team on how he or she wants it excavated.
The level of trust there.
Absolutely. And so essentially the team leader becomes the civilian.
Interesting. So I recall in 2018, there were dozens of U.S. remains that were given to us from North Korea. And we mentioned a little earlier about partnering with host nation countries. And I have to imagine North Korea is not a strong partner or any partner with us, but can you walk me through how this actually happened and what was the result?
You hit the nail on the head. So I mentioned 46 countries.
Yes.
All of them willingly, responsibly work with the United States, even China. In fact, we have a team in China today, given all the bilateral tensions and disagreements.
Yeah.
China recognizes as a humanitarian effort. North Korea is the one exception. And it's unfortunate because of the 7,500 missing from the Korean War, 5,300 are in North Korea.
That many.
Wow. And so anytime we can gain access to North Korea, which we last had in 2005, So it's been 19 years. But we actually had teams there 4 times a year, 2 teams, working from 1996 to 2005, working with the North Korean Army. Very successful. We worked at Unsan and Chosin, finding soldiers, remains of soldiers and Marines from the Korean War. Very successful. But we haven't been back since 2005. Fast forward, the summit that you mentioned between President Trump and the North Korean leader, there were 4 commitments. We were commitment number 4, that North Korea agreed to both turn over remains that they were holding and resume those joint operations. We were very enthusiastic, in fact, very excited, because a month after the summit, North Korea says we have 55 boxes. They repatriated the remains to us. They said it was 55 service members. It turned out to be 501 bones, 250 different individuals.
Whoa.
Now, we've identified 90 Americans to date. We've segregated 90 South Koreans that we repatriated to South Korea. So again, very successful. The remains have been out of the ground for decades, but every single one of them yielded DNA, which allowed us to make those 90 identifications.
What motivated them to hand over these remains? Was it just a summit with those political diplomacy?
It was. And I think Chairman Kim recognized it as a goodwill gesture. It was one of the 4 commitments. And I think he believed there might be a quid pro quo, that if I cooperate on this, I might get something back from that.
It's interesting you mentioned working with North Korea and China, and I know we should be working with countries where we can. And this is actually an area where we can and should. I know South Korea, they're like an excellent model of a partner. Do they have a program similar to ours?
You know, that adage about imitation.
Yeah.
They came to us back in 2001, asked us to help them stand up a capability much like ours. They have 300,000 missing from the Korean War.
Wow.
So we helped stand them up. They, in terms of capability, in terms of professionalism, nobody rivals us other than the South Koreans. You can go to their laboratory in Seoul and see, and it looks almost like ours.
You know, let's talk a little bit about those laboratories. I know there's 2, one in Hawaii and one in Nebraska. What is done there?
They are the preeminent forensic human skeletal labs in the world.
Wow.
In my biased view,
Sure.
surpassing even the FBI's. They have technicians and scientists from several lines of expertise. And so they utilize all the remains and any evidence that comes in that are recovered from the field or a disinterment are taken to one of those 2 laboratories, utilizing 7 lines of evidence: dental, bones and bones assessment, DNA. We cut the bone sample, and then we partner with the Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory at Dover. They are the preeminent DNA laboratory in the world. And so these scientists spend anywhere from weeks to months, sometimes even years, hopefully being able to take the evidence in front of them, attach a correlation based upon that analysis to an individual. I never knew this, but your collarbone, your clavicle is as unique as a fingerprint.
Huh.
So if the scientists have the chest x-rays that the service member took when they entered the service, and we find a clavicle in the field, we will take a superimposed image, and they've developed this algorithm that sorts all 60,000 x-rays in terms of, is that clavicle, who does that clavicle belong to in this set of x-rays?
I never knew that. That's super interesting.
The other interesting thing I'd share with you is isotope analysis.
Yes, like little clocks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What you ate, what you drank as an infant, as a toddler, stays with you for life. It becomes a marker such that if we find a set of remains and we do an isotopic analysis, we can determine, did you grow up in the Midwest?
Mm-hmm.
We can even say, did you grow up in California, North or South? Did you grow up in this city? Simply by analyzing the isotopic signature on those remains versus what we call isoscapes, which are the maps of where these isotopes might have ended up. It's a cheaper and faster test than DNA, and oftentimes we can help segregate, if not contribute to the identification.
And I know, we're talking about bringing folks home and giving them the proper honors. And we're also talking about giving families, I wouldn't say closure, but giving them notification. And can you tell me what's it like to be in a room?
Whenever we make an identification, we turn the remains and the report over to the respective service casualty office. And it makes sense.
Yes.
The services have contacts with the families. They are the ones that do the genealogical research to help us find the family member that might donate DNA for the future, as well as once they notify the family of an ID, then they'll arrange the military burial. They'll arrange the benefits that might be coming to the family. What we've heard is that is absolutely euphoric. In fact, when the service casualty office makes the initial call to say, are you the niece of Private so-and-so? Oftentimes the family member will say, is this a crank call? And it oftentimes takes 2 or 3 attempts before the family realizes, my gosh, this is the real thing, because so many of them have come to expect that, their loved one will be lost forever.
It's a special moment that very few people get to be a part of, but I'm sure it's incredible. What else should people know about the DPAA that they might not?
First of all, I think it's again, I mentioned earlier, an embodiment of our values as Americans. But I think it's something where concept of coming home is something that all Americans, actually any human being, understands.
It goes back to Odysseus. It's a story about going home.
Going home.
Yeah.
And this is what this is about. So I think for Americans, if one thing I would offer for them to understand, and your members, is that naively, when I first became associated with the mission, I thought surely 60, 70, 80 years have passed. Surely families have moved on. Absolutely not. There's a void in mind and heart that follows the family generationally. They know everything about the loss. They know that their grandfather died in this battle on this day, but the uncertainty of not having remains leaves an exacerbated grieving. And so you'll be talking to a family member. I have a funeral tomorrow at Arlington with a sailor, USS Oklahoma, that we identified. It's a great niece. I guarantee you, she's never met her great uncle, but I also guarantee you, talking to her tomorrow, she will know everything about her great uncle. It's as if you're talking to his mother. And it's also one where communities become engaged. Yeah, the service members coming home to be reunited with the family, but it's also the community that comes out en masse. Veterans that come out en masse to pay their tribute to an American hero lost for decades that's now coming home.
I think with the families too, they often can be part of the actual identifying them. They have DNA.
Absolutely. In fact, anything that we use in order to identify an individual, we must have something to compare it against. So if we're going to use dental, we have to have the dental x-ray or even the charted dental record of the service member. If we have bones and we use DNA, we need a family reference sample. So DNA didn't come about until 1992. And so I can go to Dover Air Force Base. I can go find your chip where you donated your blood.
Yep.
And it's still there on file. So again, if you went missing, instantaneously we could pull your DNA sample. But for anybody before 1992, we need a family reference sample. The good news is technology has allowed this, that if we have a family member 4 generations removed,
4 generations
from the service member, we can make an identification if we have the person's DNA.
I think I remember when the when the American remains were handed over by North Korea, the call was put out for if you have folks that you think are missing or that are missing and you think may be in these remains, please send us your DNA.
Absolutely. And so we're in good shape for the Vietnam War. 90% of the missing, we have a family member's DNA on file. Korean War, 94%. But because World War II is fairly new, 2010, we're only at 20%. So every time I have the opportunity, or any of my colleagues have the opportunity, we always make the plea that if you know someone or even have someone in your family that might have been lost, missing in action from World War II, contact your service casualty office.
That's something DV members can do, and Americans far and wide.
Absolutely.
They should do, perhaps.
And it's a simple case of us sending a DNA test kit, 2 cheek swabs, put it in the FedEx envelope, and mailed back.
Don't even have to leave your home.
Not at all.
Excellent. Well, Kelly, thanks again for being here and for the work. And if you want to know more about the DPAA, you can go to dpaa.mil. Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks again, Kelly, for your work and for shining a light on something so many Americans can connect with. If you're interested, this interview was also edited in a print version in the DAV magazine. It's the September-October edition. You can go to DAV.org and search our archives for it. Or if you're a member, make sure you get the magazine and you can pick it right up. Until next time, I'm Matt Saintsing.
Cars for DAV, cars for DAV. Donate that car to DAV. Help a disabled veteran live proud and free. Donate that car to DAV.
Donate a car to help disabled American veterans by calling 1-833-CAR-4DAV.
Cars for DAV, help them live proud and free. Donate that car to DAV.
Visit carsfordav.org today.